we are. We're just going to go off on this little map here and discover all the hidden stuff that we didn't know about Glasgow.
Looking forward to it.
I know.
Yeah.
Going right back to the from 1700s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is our first stop here.
Trongate, Glasgow, and we've walked past it a million times.
I know.
Let's find out about the real history of what the Trongate is.
The Trongate is one of the oldest streets in Glasgow. Its hidden story is that of the Tobacco Lords. The Tobacco Lords were a group of merchants in Glasgow who became very rich and powerful from trading in tobacco grown on slave plantations.
We're only at the first point, and I can't believe what we're learning that I never learned in school.
True. You had these tobacco lords basically. They had all the whole get-up, the white wigs and everything, and they were like the most powerful people in the city. And basically they had made all their money from taking slaves out of Africa to work in the plantation. It's like having these foreigners building this city and these guys just pretending, like fronting to be the actual people that were doing it, but it was crooks.
Glasgow became a rich city, but it became rich on the back of slavery. It became rich on the back of plantations and all the goods that they produced.
Yeah,
so, people look at the goods, the tobacco, the sugar, the cotton, but the story behind how the goods were produced is the story that we're not taught.
So we're going to
City Hall.
City Hall. Fantastic.
City Halls was the first performance hall for large gatherings and concerts to be built in Glasgow. In 1846, Frederick Douglass, a campaigner fighting against the enslavement of African people, came to speak at the City Halls about the horror of enslavement on the slave plantations.
Yeah. So the City Halls were built for huge gatherings, and I guess the merchants needed somewhere to entertain themselves and show off their wealth, so they built these huge buildings.
Like
but interestingly,
it came back
full circle, and
one of the slaves that had been born in the plantations that these guys owned came back to Glasgow to fight for freedom, to really kind of expose the horrors and the travesty of what was going on over there. I don't know. Maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the lords didn't know. See, they weren't over there. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But worst case scenario, it was very much like, work them as hard as they can, as hard as the owners or whoever was in charge over there, in order to produce as much tobacco as possible. So I don't see how they couldn't have been aware of how terrible the conditions were. But thankfully this guy got free. He was actually born the son of a slave that had been taken, came back and spoke and led, loads of like kind of discussions about how that should not be allowed and how they should abolish that. So I'm really glad.
And the conditions on the ships and the conditions on the plantations.
Behind St David's Church, now the Ramshorn Kirk Theatre, is the remaining section of the Ramshorn Cemetery. It was a place where rich and powerful people were buried.
This is the graveyard in here.
Yes. So this is where John Glassford
and Buchanan.
Yes,
So
and you see that they're now enslaved.
They're enslaved,
they're the ones that got chains around them. So their graves are literally in there.
I think some of the graves are still. They built Ingham Street over the top of it.
That's what it's.
But Buchanan and Glassford, who was the most influential. And the richest, I think. And so because they had so much money, they were instrumental in all of Glasgow politics.
Yes.
They decided where the buildings were going.
Yes, the infrastructure. Everything, basically. Let's head down to Miller Street. Do you realise that we are walking on the graves of these tobacco lords? Things have changed, let me tell you.
During the 17th and 18th century, as the transatlantic slave trade grew, the merchants used the huge sums of money they had made to build grand houses for themselves. The Tobacco Merchant's House in Miller Street is the oldest and sole surviving house in the merchant city.
Right, so we're looking for the Merchant's House, 42.
42 Miller Street, so it's along here.
Oh,
there's a plaque and everything to it. Have you seen that, Alison? There
That's
you go.
it.
This is his house.
If you look up this street up to George Square,
Yes. Oh yes, that's right.
and that
Robert
right,
Burns.
Robert Burns. This is the most interesting thing I've ever heard about
I
Robert
know,
Burns.
That's true. That's true.
Right, you can go.
Right, so according to this app, he actually accepted a job as one of the overseers on the plantations in Jamaica, I think they said. Can you imagine our Robert Burns was going to be cracking the whip across
but
the plantation?
Then his Porsche took off.
Yeah.
And he
got off the hook.
He didn't go, but
yes,
that's one of the most
but
shocking things I've heard about Robert Burns.
I agree.
We've learned so much today just walking about our city. I don't think we are going to become historians overnight.
No.
But if people download the app, take their kids on a tour of Glasgow, and have a discussion about it.
That's progress.
That's progress. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Cunningham Mansion, now the Gallery of Modern Art, was built for William Cunningham, who made huge sums of money from slave plantations, producing both sugar and tobacco.
This is
Which
GOMA.
is GOMA now.
Yeah.
But it was built for Cunningham, who was one of the richest tobacco merchants. But then it became the exchange for all commodities.
That's right.
Not just the triangle of the tobacco, sugar and cotton.
This is where we make the connection to India, because actually they were not only taking the slaves from the African side and having plantations over there, but in India there was that East Indian Company.
East India
and
Company.
they were kind of bringing stuff over from there as well.
And so taking away the human rights
Yes.
of another
location, another country. So it's not just a case of they made themselves rich. They plunged those people into poverty.
Yes.
If you look at India today, there are areas that are up and coming, the Mumbai, being more affluent, but it's largely, enslaved in poverty now.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have to say, did that have an impact?
Fact.
A lot of Africa as well, with things, metals and gold and diamonds, resources were stripped out.
The City Chambers is one of Glasgow's grandest buildings. Its grandeur is a reflection of the wealth of Glasgow during this time. It had become known as the second city of the empire.
This is so amazing. So this was basically the monument to the wealth from all the trading and the plantations and just the basic British Empire.
It's got one of the largest marble staircases in Western Europe.
I know. Wow.
Good fact.
Yeah.
Covered in marble. So at this point, Glasgow is the second city of the empire.
Oh my
goodness!
gosh.
It's just.
Can you imagine that?
The things we're finding out today, it's actually unbelievable. I think the Glasgow University was round about here before it located to the West End. And so the flip side of all the enslavement and all the oppression, the first
African American
who got a medical degree got it out of Glasgow University.
That's true.
So
he was Glasgow University was the only place to accept him. Everybody else was like, no, we're not taking these black people in. But Glasgow University kind of broke the mould, despite the city being in the front line of, enslavement, and there was a big shift. This was the Enlightenment coming in, and they took this guy in. I think James McEwen Smith, I think his name was. He graduated with a medical degree. So without this app, we just wouldn't have this information. We wouldn't know,
I know.
Can you imagine we're flying blind?
And then they'll teach it in schools, and kids can come and do the app. They can walk about the city. They can find out, yes, the enslavement, where all the money came from, why they built all of these buildings. But the flip of it is, whilst we were at the forefront of the enslavement, the first black African American got his medical degree from Glasgow University.
That's a great one.
St George's Tron Church used to sit on St George's Place, which was renamed by Glasgow City Council to Nelson Mandela Place in honour of the South African activist and freedom fighter Nelson Mandela.
They changed the name to make a point. from St George's Place to Nelson Mandela Place while he was still in prison. Remember?
Yes.
So it was, and then they gave him the city, the freedom of the city or something,
which is
like
the
that.
highest honour that the highest honour that you can get from a city.
And this is all while he's in prison, and so it's sending a clear message to the government in South Africa that this is not on. That 180 is so beautiful. It's like very, very encouraging. A great finish as we come into the final leg of this app, that we are now uncovering all this, really hopeful content. It's brilliant.
Glasgow Royal Concert Hall sits in Buchanan Street, which was named in honour of Andrew Buchanan. In June 2020, anti-racist campaigners renamed many streets in Glasgow, including Buchanan Street, to highlight how many streets were named after people who profited from enslavement of African people.
The history of Glasgow is just full circle. Started off, with the tobacco lords, and they built the city and how rich they were, and now Glasgow in 2020 looking at renaming streets after activists and after people that were enlightened, that wanted to change the perception of Glasgow.
People woke up, people were enlightened, and they didn't just stay there, they did things about it. There was action that was made. Now in 2020, what are we going to really do to complete the full picture?